another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because we are returning to the Cosmere yet again. Another Sanderson episode. You know, when we were talking about a Sanderson book, we can't contain it to one episode. That just cannot be done. Even if it is the Secret Project spinoff, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, which is what we're here to get into today.
Yeah, very excited to get into this one. If you are someone who hasn't yet read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, then lucky for you, we have a spoiler-free episode that came out a couple of days ago, and you can turn this down in your headphones and head right on over to that episode, because we're going to get into a full deep dive in this episode, and that means no holds barred. Spoilers for this book are fair. We'll keep from spoiling much in the wider Cosmere or anything like that. I don't think it's necessary for us to really get into too much of that. But Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, you're going to want to have read that one if you're listening from here on out.
Well said, Dylan. We've already spent a decent amount of time talking about Yumi and the Nightmare Painter in a spoiler-free capacity. Highly recommend checking that out. I think now we can dive right into the meat and potatoes of this book, or dare I say, the noodles of this book. I don't know. The ramen version of meat and potatoes. Because we have not reflected on the plot yet. You know, we've got Yumi, we've got the Nightmare Painter. A lot of stuff happens. Now that we're in the spoiler-filled section, where do we kind of pick it up?
Yeah, I think we can start with talking about the romantic relationship probably in a little bit more depth. Like, I always feel weird talking about a romantic relationship in spoiler-free terms because you're like, okay, like, come on, the characters are gonna get together at some point. Like, even if something happens where, like, I don't know, something like Sanderson kind of teased at the end of this book, like a really sad ending where one of them has to sacrifice themselves or blah, blah, blah. Even if something like that happens, like, they're going to get together at some point. This is a book with romance pitched as a big part of the themes. And we talked a little bit more broadly about the romance in terms of us being like, look, romance has never been Sanderson's greatest strength as a writer, but we thought this is the best that we've seen from him. And I think that we talked about, it's because it's more genuine. It was two characters that were a good fit for his writing style in terms of them both being kind of naive and awkward in their own ways. And we also talked about how he just kind of let it happen a little bit more in a way that serves the characters and feels true to them. So let's talk a little bit about like the moments that stick out to us in the romance and what made this one stronger than the others.
Great idea, Dylan, because we have Yumi, we have the Nightmare Painter, and to me, the strength in the romance comes from it not being the focus from the beginning. It's not like they had this meet cute and then had to awkwardly flirt for forever, and then there's like, oh, does he like me? I don't know. It's like all of that was kind of like removed from this, which I really appreciated, because in the beginning of this book, we established these two characters. One is a painter who works this job as the Nightmare Painter, who goes out at night and finds nightmares and paints to kind of contain them and stop them. And then you have Yumi, who's the Yokihidro, the priestess who summons spirits and uses those spirits to help out village folk, townspeople, right? And then what happens is we all know what happens. This is the spoiler-filled one. They end up in each other's worlds and switching back and forth where, you know, what happens is, and I want to make sure I get this right. So in Yumi's world, Painter appears as though he was Yumi, while she is
Yes.
this spirit that only he can see. And then in Painter's world, Yumi is herself in person, and then Painter is this spirit character.
Yes.
So it's interesting. Like it's not exactly a one for one. There's those subtle differences. And what that allows for, one, it creates this mystery of why are these different scenarios? Why can't we repeat the experiment in both worlds? It's like you would think that, oh, I'd be you in your world, you'd be me in my world, and that's the mystery. But it's not quite. So there's some weird stuff going on there, and Sanderson has a plan for why that is. You just couldn't even begin to think of what the heck it could be. But he's contrived it, and so they're trying to figure out. They don't even know why it's happened, so they don't even know what they're supposed to do. So you have these two characters from very different backgrounds, very different. I was going to say worlds, but I guess it's very different. Settings, we can now say. In other words, spoilers. Yes.
Because there are points. I always thought that was interesting because there are points where I know, like that back of the book thing I read earlier, they said worlds, I'm pretty sure. So it's a little bit of it's the kind of thing where you shouldn't take that as law of anything.
I was told I was going to get different worlds. This is the same world. I want my money back.
It's just false advertising. When you're trying to think through, like, okay, what could be going on here? And it's very easy to be like, well, the back of the book said they were in different worlds, so that couldn't be it. They
right. I remember even at one point they're like, could we be in the same place? We just never made contact. It's like, how would that be possible? Is there like an ocean or something? Like they were trying to figure it out. So yeah, it definitely was a bit of a red herring detail that had you thinking like, so they're like alternate universes or something like, the multiverse is so popular now. Is this a Cosmere multiverse situation? Not quite.
In some ways.
In some ways. And that was the focus, right? One, they're learning each other out. They're like trying to take on each other's disciplines and philosophies of life. And it allows for a level of understanding and support that can kind of hold up a genuine relationship, so that when all of a sudden they start to look at each other a different way about halfway, 3/4 of the way through the book, you're like, aha, it's starting now. I know where this is going. I can appreciate it more. And then in the end, when these characters are in peril and you even are believing that Yumi has sacrificed herself, you are able to connect at that level of, no, we were just getting started. Like it was a really nice way to present a relationship that wasn't some sort of like, let's be fair for Stormlight Archive. It's not like a guy suited in armor and the girl goes, so how do you poop? And that's like they're flirting, which is a real thing that happens in Stormlight Archive. It wasn't like that at all. It was very refreshing for a Sanderson romance for sure. A sand romance. A romancerson.
Romanderson? There's something here, Charles, but we'll probably
we'll workshop it. We'll
workshop this one off the air. But I totally agree. I think you always have to think, why was this choice made? Because from a narrative perspective, because like Sanderson, he explains it in terms of his Cosmere and all the rules of that, and he's like, oh, you're like, you have so much investiture that you're able to like, and it's like,
makes me think of midichlorians. I'm like, oh god, we're talking about investiture.
But I will say, like, Sanderson, as I'm sure you're not surprised, has put in a lot more thought into all of this than Star Wars did with midichlorians. But
that's very true.
But for the casual reader, this is like, okay, that's just an explanation to justify something that Sanderson wanted to do narratively, and it fits within the physics of his world. And it's like, okay, why is this done narratively? Because Sanderson doesn't want it to get in the way of what he's trying to do with Yumi's character, especially, I think, which is she needs to get the experience of what it would be like to be herself, just living a normal life. Because primarily at the end of the book, yeah, we have Niharo Painter. We have him actually make a lot
Nikaro.
of. Is it Nik? Oh, is it
It's pronounced
Nikaro?
Nikaro.
Nikaro?
Nikaro. Nikaro.
Okay, gotcha. I thought it was an H.
There's no
Like,
H.
there's no H. Okay. Forget it. Forget it. They usually call him
Unless you want to
Painter.
call him to doubt the pronunciation of the
I don't. I'm
greats
gonna say
Michael
Painter.
Kramer and Kate Redding.
I got too bold just going out there, and I was like, oh, like
Just assuming
I could
letters.
just say Painter. Yeah, I could just say
Nikaro.
Painter, and then yeah, okay. But point being, Painter, which is what he's primarily referred to as. Yeah, you're right.
And he's the only one
There's
too.
no
It's not
H.
like they're in the noodle shop and they're all like painter, painter, painter. It's like they just all
Yeah.
have names. I don't know what's going on
It's
here.
interesting that he's the one that they all. I mean, it's
But I
interesting
guess
because
it's all
at first
told through
explained.
Hoyt, and he takes his own narrative liberties. Like, oh, I
Yeah,
translated all these things. These words don't exist in this setting. They're speaking different
yeah,
languages. I'm translating it for you. So,
yeah. And okay, Painter.
mm,
He makes some. He develops as a character. Like his story does
mhm,
take him from someone who's like super insecure and riddled with like basically like some self-hatred, and gets him to the
mhm.
point where he can shed a lot of that and be open to relationships with others again, and that's awesome. But
Yeah,
Yumi literally, her entire life changes by the end of it, and we need her as a character to be able to figure out like, oh hey, what does it mean for me to actually be a normal person just living my life in this world?
mm,
And the end of the book has them basically like, now we're normal people living our life in this world, we have a noodle shop.
yeah,
And it's like, well, Painter was kind of ready for that already. Like
yeah.
he was kind
Right.
of like in a place where if his life ended up being living at a noodle shop, and like, I mean, he'd probably want to paint, but if he was just living in a noodle shop and that, or I don't think he lives there. If he was running a noodle shop and living his life in that way, I think he'd be okay, but he develops in a way where he can actually rely on another person to open himself
Yeah,
up
it's
to
the
another
fact
person.
that he
So
was
he
able to
needs,
have friends and
yeah.
relationships, right?
So he needs to learn what it's like to be Yumi, to understand that, and to
Yeah,
be like, oh, I really can connect with this person because I understand her at a deeper level, and other people go through the kind of loneliness I go through, blah, 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 that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Yumi needs to more come to a place where she understands what she would be like in another setting where she could be herself and be a normal person. So it's kind of why
right.
Sanderson, in my opinion, chose that narratively.
Yeah, and it like you said, the fact that they were able to like walk a mile in each other's shoes and see what they were capable of, that endears themselves to each other because
Yeah.
so between the magic system and the mystery and the relationship, they all weave into each other into a pretty efficient 300 pages, I think. Um, One of the things that I really like when you talk about Painter and his character was that Sanderson was very restrained and almost had this whole other mystery of why does Painter have such a weird relationship with his coworkers? And he doesn't say from the beginning that it was he lied about being accepted
Mhm.
into the next level of painterhood, and he pretended he was going to painter school and he wasn't for like a year, and then like everyone found out. It was kind of a wild tale that you get about just over halfway into the book, maybe three-quarters of the way in. And I like that we have those little mysteries kind of peppered into his character. So we're kind of learning these things as we go. And that One helped because this book has you trying to figure out what's going on for a lot of different reasons. Sanderson has that natural talent of making you want to get to the end to be like, where's this going? How is this going to play out? What's the answer here? And one of those things that I was wondering was, why is Painter so defeated when it comes to relationships? Because he was like, well, it's better that they just think I'm a monster now because it just makes it easier to not have feelings for them anymore, knowing that they hate me so
Hmm.
much that there's no possibility of rekindling a friendship. You know, he has that kind of attitude for so long. And then Yumi comes in, and in 2 seconds, they're all like, you should come over and eat noodles with us
Yeah.
sometime. And like, oh, forget Nikoro. He sucks. Like, hang out with us. I can't believe he would leave you alone. Like, let's
Hmm.
bring you in. And just how quickly that happened for Yumi, who's had no social interaction ever. And already she's got a table full of friends. So that was a really fun thing to watch play out as well. And just only adds to their characterization and the intimacy of their characters as well.
Yeah, and interestingly, it kind of violates one of the lessons that Sanderson teaches in his lecture and kind of
Hmm.
speaks some to him just being more free flowing with how he decided to tell this story, where he I couldn't tell you exactly where, but I watched a lot of those Sanderson lectures, and at one point he's like, you can't really have a character hide things from the reader that they know in a third person limited point of view. And
Hmm.
you can make the case that this is more Hoyt is our storyteller, and this is
Yeah,
how he has chosen to tell the story.
but it's still
But
written.
it's, yeah, it's third person limited.
Hmm.
So, I mean, a little bit of a deviation from that, but you can easily forget that Hoyt is even narrating until you see like one of the parentheticals where he is like, actually, like this is about investiture, blah 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 blah,
Hmm.
and smarmy comment. Like
Yeah,
if besides those,
yeah.
you can easily forget that Hoyt's
Little
telling a
comment.
story. What is that from? It's like everybody read
The
a little
Office,
comment.
where
Yeah,
Dwight's pretending to
yeah,
be Jim, and
exactly.
he's just like doing an impression of Jim. He's like, little comment. It's
Yeah,
just-
he's like, rare, a little comment or something
that's
like
your
that,
impression
right?
of Hoyt.
Yeah.
It's like a little comment about being a Korak.
Yeah. So, yeah, anyway, we've had other times, like I can think of one instance in the Stormlight where that happened, in the Stormlight archive where that happened, but it was with a character I was literally like traumatized and was lying to themselves about what happened.
Hmm,
Uh, yeah, I don't know if that's ringing a bell, Charles, but you'll remember what I'll tell you off the air, but you'll remember when I bring
gotcha.
it up. But point being, Sanderson's allowing himself to have a little bit more freedom and violate some of his rules, and it adds to the mystery of like you were saying, oh, why is he like this? These people seem really nice, and he says they used to be friends. What happened? And it speaks to a lot of the drama that is central to this story. It's definitely at the forefront compared to anything like battles or big fights. We get some at the end of like a dramatic battle, if you want to call it that, but it's tame compared to some of the huge scale stuff that goes on in Sanderson's other works.
Right. No, I agree. And I mean, that's one of the things we can talk about too from the plot perspective. It is, since so much of this book is trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. I wanted to get your thoughts on, we'll call it a Sanderlanche, that rising
Yeah.
action climax moment in the story when a lot of stuff is revealed, and then how Sanderson dedicates 2 chapters to Hoyt explaining
Yeah.
what the heck is happening. I wanted to get your thoughts on those parts of the book.
Okay, well that's two bits there. I'll say
Mm,
that uh, so the Hoyd thing, you could view it as okay, Sanderson was just like, you know what, screw it. I'm just gonna tell them how everything worked
save
instead of
ourselves a couple
showing
hundred
them and
pages.
shit. Yeah. Yeah. You can see it that way, and you can also see it through the to me that's a little bit of a I mean, maybe you're seeing that positively because it's saving us a lot of time. But I think for Sanderson and for the story that we're trying to tell, the other way fits a little bit more, which is like all the raw pieces were there in the showing of things, and all
Mhm.
it took was like, can Hoyt just like kind of reiterate all of this
Yeah.
and like connect all the dots that were just a little bit apart from each other? And to me, I actually liked it because I was like, okay, here
Yeah.
in my head, I pretty much understood what was going on. I was like, here's what I think is going on. And then he basically reiterated mostly. And I was like, okay, yeah, okay, I got it, I got it. And maybe there were a couple points that it was like, oh, okay, I get like, you didn't really get the chance to explain that, but Hoyt will connect that. But
Yeah.
to me, like this story, it's not about the intricate magic system and the Cosmere and the laws of how it works and blah blah. Like Sanderson fits all of that stuff into like, okay, I need this to make sense in my universe. For the,
Mhm.
the big Cosmere fans who are going to be like, wait, but what does this mean about the cognitive realm? Like, which like I'm not quite at that level of understanding. Maybe I aspire one day, but it's
Right.
but he fits it in, but all that is really a backseat to the story we're trying to tell, which is one of the relationship, the romance, the drama. And to me, I didn't need more than just our narrator being like, "Hey, like here's exactly what's going on and here's the missing pieces." So I don't know. What did you think? And we'll get to I liked aspects of the Sanderlanche in terms of like the reveals I thought were really cool. But yeah, what did you think, Charles?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I was kind of worried about going into this was how much of the overarching Cosmere is gonna play a role in the story because I'm not strong when it comes to the Copper Mind and Cosmere lore and all this other
Not strong
stuff.
in the cognitive realm, if you know what I'm saying.
I do. I do. And yeah, so I was kind of worried about that. But it didn't really have huge implications in this. We know we talked about investiture and Hoyt as a character, and then the fact that there's, you know, characters like Design, who are, we can remember being certain kinds of characters present in.
Yeah,
That's what I'm trying to avoid
Stormlight.
spoilers here.
Yeah. Oh
Says
well, doesn't that's not a spoiler to
no,
just
it's
say
not.
it's
It's not to say
reminiscent of
that
certain
that
kinds of
there's
characters
yeah,
in
these kinds
a
of
different
characters
series.
exist in
Yeah.
Stormlight. So I was like, okay, I'm following those parts. And then, the mystery was unraveling and there was the machine and they were grabbing spirits and spirits were looking like other people and it wasn't like Mistborn where like it would Mistborn I feel like as complex as the sleight of hand was to make those reveal moments happen in some of his other works, this one the answer was just a bit more complicated than average. I think it wasn't as simple as like, oh, it was this guy and he did this. He like
Yeah.
twisted this thing to do this. It's like, no, it's literally like this super complicated thing that happened. And so while interesting, it wasn't like super clicking for me. So I do appreciate the Hoyd chapters, and I certainly didn't need an extra bunch of pages to make that happen more naturally. And since you're using the storyteller elements anyway,
Yeah.
it was a good fit. So it made me feel more confident that the story was self-contained and I wasn't missing any pieces. And I know Sanderson typically delivers like that anyway, as much as he's got this whole Cosmere world planned out and charted, and I'm sure it does connect to a whole bunch of things that the hardcore Sanderson fans are really into and enjoying probably in this story. I was still able to appreciate it. So I enjoyed it. I was just like, the answer was just a lot more complicated than I was
Yeah.
expecting, which whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't really have an opinion on. I was just like, I was never going to get this. This is very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a few more Cosmere novels than you, Charles, so maybe
Mm,
that helped me some. I still couldn't get all the way there, but I felt like it was there to kind of understand. And already the scholars were starting to kind of explain it.
Yeah. Mm.
And then Hoyt was like, oh, no, I'll just take it from here, or a little comment.
Yeah.
But I
Little
think,
comment.
yeah, I think that it's, I think what Sanderson does well, this is my understanding as someone who still is not at the level of like, uh, really understanding the ins and outs of all the Cosmere world building like the huge Sander fans do. I
Yeah.
think he provides in these kind of stories something that we can all understand in without you don't even really need any Cosmere knowledge, like you were saying in the spoiler-free episode, to enjoy this book. You just have to be willing to be like, okay, fine, like I believe you, Hoyd. And there's also on the flip side things that are kind of like I don't know if minor is the right word, but not a huge deal for the nature of the story being told in here that have then like big implications for what it means about the Cosmere universe and how it works. So it's a balance of a huge Sander fan who's obsessed with the Cosmere can be like, oh, like, so that means, insert explanation here that I'm not strong enough in the cognitive realm to understand.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but for us, it's just like if you're reading through the book, or if you're someone who's never read a Cosmere book, just like, okay, I guess that's how this works in this world. Like, but what does that mean for Yumi and for Painter? Like, how are they going to deal with this current, very specific situation caused by that? So I think it kind of works in that way, which is a hard thing to balance, but I think Sanderson's so good at understanding reader experience and putting himself in the shoes of, he's much like Yumi at the side of, or really more Painter at the side of Yumi, um, while she's living her life. And he's like, oh, okay, like this is what this kind of reader will understand. I'm here right beside you. I get it.
Oh yeah.
But he's not going to ask every reader to be an expert, and he provides different kinds of experiences for the different kinds of readers.
And that's well said. And I think what I appreciate about this book that I feel he's more inclined to do than in something like Stormlight is take time to explain some of the greater Cosmere lore. He starts talking about other worlds and traveling around and referencing other things. I feel like, when we were reading things like Warbreaker and Emperor's Soul, other independent works from Sanderson that are in the Cosmere, you were like, oh, you know who that was and what this person did and what that was. And I was like, I caught maybe half of those. So I don't know. And those books don't explain anything about the greater Cosmere. You wouldn't even know those existed just reading those books on their own. And they hold up as independent stories, great reads and everything. And coming into this one, he's leaning more into it. Like, here's the greater world. Let me start to kind of lay some of this out for you, which it'll be interesting as he continues to write more and more and invest more and more in this Cosmere universe, what he'll have to do to kind of keep a wider audience invested, kind of like how Marvel is trying to keep a
Yeah.
wider audience invested in all these different multiverses and Avengers and the like whatever all else is happening, right? So it's an interesting era for Sanderson, and I appreciated it because I'm not about to go to, the Coppermind and read up on on Cosmere lore to follow these things. So I definitely appreciated the time to go into it. And I know that, people are saying that, oh, these Hoyd narrated things are experiments for other works he's planning that are like prequels to this stuff and using a similar kind of narrative device as a way to explain it. So it's it's interesting and I enjoy it, and it helps me feel like I can enjoy the greater context of the story. I hate feeling like I'm missing stuff. Like I know I'm
Yeah.
missing something, which happens a lot. So
Yeah, I totally get that, Charles. And as you're getting at, the choice to have Hoyt as the narrator here makes a huge difference for being able to make this a story that is comprehensible to the average reader and not necessarily not just a huge Cosmere fan. And the interesting thing is, Charles, Hoyd was originally supposed to be like the main character of the Cosmere. Basically,
Mhm.
like when Sanderson was thinking of this universe and he was gonna tell all these stories in it, like he started with Hoyd in his head, and then he realized that like just starting with this character who knew so much about the universe and like I don't want to get into too much because of the potential for spoilers of other books, but obviously if you've read this book, then you know Hoyd is a very knowledgeable person who's able to figure out how to travel between worlds and all that kind of stuff. Clearly powerful in some ways, right? And he's kind of realizing, oh, like, I don't know if this is the place to start. But I wouldn't be surprised if now he's starting to move toward like, all right, now like Hoyd is going to be a very huge part of where I'm going. But we'll wait to see that. Charleston doesn't have a huge role in our discussion of this book. Charles, you brought up the idea of the Sanderlanche,
Mhm.
and I think there were moments toward the end of this book where I was like, like it does remind you, even though this isn't a huge stakes epic, it's like it does remind you it's Brandon Sanderson writing it because there were kind of a bunch of reveals coming at the end, and to me the
Right.
most like surprising and interesting one was when like Yumi and all of her uh, like townspeople and all of that were revealed to be the nightmares. Like I was
Yeah.
not like I
Yeah.
knew something was going on and I was like, oh, where are these nightmares coming from? Something's connected here between these two worlds. Like are the spirits that she's summoning, are they the nightmare? Like that kind of stuff. But I was not there with like, oh my like Yumi is gonna turn into a nightmare. Like
Yeah.
which obviously didn't exactly happen in the way that happened with some of the other characters, but it was interesting and surprising and cool.
Yeah,
What do you
I
think?
agree. Like Leon being the
Yeah.
big nightmare in the beginning that Nikoro encountered and continued to encounter, and then she ends up being the one that kind of saves the day by awakening Yumi's
Yeah.
memories and all of those things. That was a clever little weave in of this third character, right? So yeah, it was a very interesting reveal, and the reveal that Yumi was just basically living the same day over and over again, and that she was like
Yeah.
thousands of years old. But they because she was too powerful to kill, too powerful to keep alive. They just kept her in this stasis of Groundhog Daying her for 1,000 years, and that was an interesting tactic. And the
Worked for a
fact that
while.
it worked for yeah, I'd say, and the fact that they're two different time periods in the same world, and all the what is it called, the hedron, or the power source in Painter's world. Um,
Oh, the all the like things that they get the lights from and
yeah, it's not like
stuff.
hedron or
It's
something, but
something with an H. It's like hint. I don't want to say it wrong. I already messed up Painter's name.
but
But we'll find it.
yeah, the fact that that fuel came from spirits and from the machine that was we got to see it being like unveiled and invented in Yumi's world. So those aspects were very interesting, and no, it was a fun little Sanderlanche, and what is a relative for Sanderson, a small work. So very very contained story there.
Heian.
Heian.
Heian. Is it
Heian.
pronounced Heian in the
It's
audiobook?
Heian. Yeah, Heian.
Okay.
I know
So,
from the
yeah.
audiobook.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
Sanderson did a
go ahead.
great job of connecting all of it and it was exciting and the I was kind of not hoping because I'm like reading the story and rooting for the characters, but also I was
Mhm.
like, will Sanderson dare turn Yumi into like a stalking nightmare, like or something like that? I was like, he didn't quite go there. That
Mhm.
would have been interesting.
But he did
But
have a sacrifice moment that I was like,
yes.
interesting. And I was believing it. Like, I had the caveat of, like, is he going to do this, like, oh, I brought her back, hooray thing, which he ended up doing, which is fine. I mean, I liked it. But he did have me going for a second there. I was like, wow, her character arc is that at the end of all that, learning to be herself, she's going to sacrifice herself. Like, I mean, I guess that's kind of a ironic moment, but no, she gets to run a noodle shop. So there we go.
And isn't that what we all would like deep down? I think
Hmm.
that I was reading it and it had vibes of like, I don't want to name the series exactly, Charles, but I think
Hmm.
that it's a series that we often talk about the controversial nature of that. And maybe
Hmm.
that's going even too far for, um, oh, are
You'll
you
have to
not
type it
aware
to
what I'm
me.
talking
I'm
about?
not picking up what you're putting down, unfortunately. You'll have to type it to me.
Yeah, well, at least if you don't know what we're talking about, then I can feel comfortable that me just saying what I said is not going to reveal it
Okay.
to people. But
Yes.
what it seemed like at
Ah,
first was giving me vibes of the series I just typed out to
okay.
you,
I see where you're
and
going.
I was like, oh, wow, that is going to be really controversial and upset a lot of people because I was thinking about that other series. And
Yeah.
then I was like, and and then I was like, he wouldn't do that, would he? Like Sanderson loves these like happy endings deep down. But I was like, when I was reading the scene earlier where she was like watching the like soap operas and
Oh yeah, yeah.
she's like, wait, he's just gonna leave after all that, and
Yeah.
like why would they do that? And then Painter was like, well, sometimes the ending is just right even if it's sad, and she's like, why do they have to have sad endings, shouldn't they all be happy? And it was like
Clever.
yeah, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking about when he was writing that, or when I was reading that part, and I was like, he might be hinting toward that this is going to have a sad ending, but it's going to feel right, which is how I
Mhm.
described that other series that I was
Yeah.
referencing's ending and why I love it.
I like
But
that series
this
ending, and I
is
know this is not a good conversation for people listening, but
no, but
I did
I
like that ending, but very controversial, and I think in the long run, history does not look favorably on it, I'll say.
you think okay, well, anyway, I'll say that this one, I was like, oh, is he actually going to hint at that? But then, or is he actually going to follow through with that? Because he seems to be hinting at that. But then there was the point later where someone was like, oh, yeah, you actually missed the final episode that they didn't tell you about, where the guy, like, that was his
Did they
evil
do that?
twin
Was
or
that written
something.
in there?
Yeah, that was in the book.
Oh,
Like,
funny, funny.
they missed,
I missed
yeah,
that
so
part.
they missed like an episode that was after like that they didn't tell people about that came after the arc, and it was some like soap opera explanation for like, oh, actually that was his evil twin, and then the real guy came back and they ended
Funny,
up happy together. And then I
funny.
was like, ah, that's exactly what Sanderson ended up doing with his actual book here, where like
Yes.
he teased at the sad ending and then there's an epilogue, and they even get Hoyt being like, well, like, sorry to offer you this ending, like, but then Painter didn't think it was the ending, what a fool, but then she came back and now they're happy,
Yes.
noodle
He
shop
like painted her
closed.
back into existence or something like that. He went to his mural, which was another setup that he like wouldn't paint his mural and they just
Yeah.
left a blank space. And then he painted her perfectly and she came back to life. Which is like, okay, that's cool too. Yeah, I mean, I
Paint
think
me
with
like one
Sandy.
of your nightmares. Paint me like one of your nightmares,
Paint me
Niara.
like you're a bamboo.
Yeah, exactly. That's Titanic for
Yes, Titanic.
for anyone not.
Titanic,
I was
Yumi
like,
and the
why
Nightmare
is
Painter
yeah,
crossover joke. I got you.
exactly.
I knew
I
exactly
was
where you
like,
were
yeah, but then I
going.
was like, if you haven't seen Titanic and that's an old movie, it's definitely possible you're like, what is Dylan talking about? This is weird. Just
Yes,
Titanic.
I got you right away. So
Yeah, I
don't
can tell
worry,
you
we're
did.
vibing. It, I thought
Paint me like
paint
one
me
of your
like one of your
bamboo
bamboo
stalks.
stalks. Yeah, exactly. When your nightmares is funnier, but it's like, which by the way, I think he has a good point where it's like, why paint anything else? It's bamboo works just fine, but it also shows like the rut that he was in. But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, dude, it works. Go for it. I don't know.
Charles,
I feel
that's
like,
exactly what you would do if you were a painter.
oh
You
yeah,
would
man, cash the
100% do
paycheck, bro.
bamboo every time.
Like,
It's
why
like
not?
it's like this
Why don't I?
speaks to Charles and his soul. It's like, dude,
There's
bamboo
painters out
works.
there trying really. No, I'd definitely be one of those. If I was lucky enough to be born in the right cast, guys playing ping pong and waiting for their Chinese food
Right.
at the fancy painter
Yeah, it's
at
like the
clubhouse,
dream something.
the
Dream watch.
dream watch, right,
Dream
right.
watch. Yeah,
So
if
that
you
was
were
another
lucky.
reveal that he didn't get in because he was in a, it's a classist thing. So that was
Yeah.
kind of good too, where he was doomed no matter what. He really was talented enough the whole time, maybe even more talented than the people that were in there. He just never gave
Yeah.
himself
Oh,
the chance.
almost definitely more
Yeah.
talented than the
And,
people
and
that were
that's
in
the
there.
thing that I wanted to bring up, where it's like the happy ending, and we haven't really gotten to talk about the humor too much, and I purposefully didn't like bring it up in the spoiler-free episode too much, the humor. But Sanderson, he knows his audience, right? He's painstakingly cultivated it for decades now to the point where he's got 42 million in a Kickstarter to release this pet project, right? So he knows who he's writing for and he knows what they like. And I definitely think that's this happy ending thing is part of it.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like he's always been a happy ending, hopeful guy. And I know he has his audience in mind when he's doing these things. Like he never wants to leave someone in a bad headspace.
Right.
Like that's not what he's about. He's always about good hopes, like good headspaces, hopeful headspaces. And he knows like the kind of humor they're looking for. To me, it's kind of awkward sometimes, but I can just hear like hardcore Sanderson fans like gushing over some of this humor stuff between design as a character who I could have done without. This is a very Sanderson thing of like, oh boy, he's writing his funny character. Here we go, buckle up. But I mean, he can't be wrong. He's got this one of the biggest fan bases of any author alive today, not just a fantasy author. So like he's tapped into this whole vibe, and I think that happy ending piece is part of it, and I think the humor is part of it as well.
Yeah. I mean, definitely not gonna hit as strong with like you, for example, as like the
I like a good
biting wit
suffering.
of Joe Abercrombie and dark humor, like that kind of stuff. And that's, I
Mm,
would say, like more my vibe as well than
mhm.
Sanderson's sense of humor. And we never felt it was one of his greatest strengths. But again, it was to me not like I didn't find myself cringing at any of the humor in here. And it was just like, that's
No.
again, it was like Sanderson has a few things that we think are not his strong suits. We
Mm,
named them humor, romance, and when he gets like world building is maybe his greatest strength. But then when he
yeah.
goes into like, okay, I
Oh,
love this
ooh.
so much, I'm just gonna keep doing it. We don't love that personally as readers. All of those things to me like were pretty much at peak form for Sanderson in terms
Oh,
of
yeah.
like least cringy humor, even like kind of funny chuckles sometimes from Hoyd's
Oh.
little comments, and then we have best romance we've probably seen from him. And a contained story where all the world building is
Mm,
serving the larger purpose of the story. It's like that's what I loved about this, and it was kind of like refreshing for me to read a Sanderson book of this nature. And I left it like you're saying, Charles. I left it in a good headspace,
yeah.
and I think there's others who have kind of perfected the art of the like bittersweet or even just like oh, you just destroyed me
Yeah.
endings.
Bucket of
That's
tears
never been,
endings.
yeah, yeah. That's never been Sanderson's way,
No.
and he delivers again with something that, as you said, his audience is looking for out of him. And
Yeah.
honestly, I didn't need this to be like
Depressing.
tragic and heartbreaking. I
No,
was
yeah,
fine with
like
like,
a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing. No,
yeah,
we did not need that from Sanderson. And I agree, Dylan, and I mentioned it in the spoiler free, where this was released in 2023, so we've been reading Sanderson for like 20 years now, and this is like a really nice trajectory to see him go on, where he is diving into some of these things outside of building up. Like I felt like for so long he's been building up the Stormlight Archive and claiming that this is my no holds barred, just unleash
yeah,
epic fantasy thing, and he's been on that path for so long. That it's nice to see him like, well, I still have creative interests and I still have things that I want to kind of experiment with and take a more artistic approach to that aren't tied to like what is my legacy work, right? There's the legacy work, and then there's the things he can afford to put out there and, focus on different elements. So it's really nice to see him kind of flex those muscles and then develop those muscles. And there were some genuinely funny moments that I enjoyed, like when she's watching the soap opera and she's like super invested in it because she's never seen a soap opera before, and then
yeah.
like painters describing like, oh, that's how it ends. It always goes this way, very painter-esque. Like, yeah, they just break up and never see each other again. It's doom and gloom, like always. He of course he would believe that, and that was funny. And there's another moment where they are in Yumi's world, and the machine, like the scholars, spot Yumi and chase her up a tree. In the audiobook, Michael Kramer does this great performance of Yumi where she just starts like, that is perhaps the most reckless thing I have ever done. She's just like just like absolutely like mind blown hysteria, and it was just a funny performance, and I was cracking up. It was really fun. Who doesn't love a good fish out of water kind of scenario? So the fact that she's like breaking the rules and running on a chase and feeling like emotion for the first time around those things was funny too. So no, I really enjoyed watching Sanderson kind of embrace those elements of storytelling, where I guess when you've written like a million books and you're still trying to find ways to challenge yourself and get that passion for writing something again, which I don't think he's ever struggled with, but he's just rather right. But but where some authors might get like a little like their
In
creative
a rut,
juices
like
might stop
Painter was,
flowing. Yeah, like in a rut,
just
like Painter
making
was.
bamboo.
Exactly. Making bamboo. He's just making bamboo constantly, a 2,000 page, rhythm of war. Okay, I'm gonna write the next one now. And then the next
Yeah.
one is bamboo everywhere. I'm gonna sea of bamboo.
Not that that seems to happen to Sanderson, but definitely something
No.
that happens to some authors.
Yeah. And I'm sure he's felt that way from time to time, or else
Oh
why
yeah,
why
guy works
why
every
write
freaking
this?
day.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Why write this if you didn't want to do something different? So that I always enjoy when an author does
For his
that.
wife,
And
Charles, and no
yeah,
other reasons.
gotta keep
Despite
the
your
wife happy, am I
painter
right?
like, yeah, your painter like cynicism and skepticism that you expressed in last episode, that Sanderson didn't actually just write this for his wife.
I mean, I believe that's why he wrote it, but I don't think he was like, and it'll only be for her and I'll never publish it. He was like, if this is good, I'll publish it for sure. Duh.
I think he probably was like, I'm going to give this to my wife, who's also like, she plays some large role in the
She works in the
publishing
company,
company
yeah.
as well,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Yeah, she works
so,
in the company.
and he says too in like acknowledgments, he's like, oh yeah, like you all have no idea how much she's doing. Like, she is
Yeah.
hugely important.
He
And
also said that she
so,
gave her blessing to publish it.
yes, that's
Like
what I was
she.
going to go
Oh, sorry, I
toward.
didn't mean to
That
cut out
he
your momentum there.
probably, yeah, no, no worries. I mean, that's what I was thinking was he probably wrote it, and then he was like, "Hey, like this is just for you. I don't have to publish it. I just wanted to write this for you." And then he was like, and as soon as she's like, she's like, "Hey, this is really good," and he's like,
$40 million
I,
of your
yeah,
own private
like
book. What's it gonna be?
right. No, I mean, I don't think it was cynical, but I think he was
No, I
probably
don't either.
always open to publishing. But if she genuinely was like, no, I do want this to be just for me, I do believe he would be like, okay.
I believe that too. And I don't believe he was writing it with the intent to publish it, but I also think he was like, this is part of my four book drop, like right in the middle of the pandemic. Like, oh yeah, I mean, I don't, but what doesn't even matter because he went through I believe that his intentions were all there. He went through the right order. Everything's above board. I'm all good. It's just one of those funny things that it was like, oh, I never planned this. It's just something that happened. $40 million in my bank account now. It just happened. So crazy. Like, that's something that takes a lot of effort from a lot of people to move that much paper. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, at the end of the day, I'm glad he shared it with the world, and I thank Mrs. Sanderson for allowing this book to be shared with the world. And I thought it was a sweet, nice, solid performance from Sanderson. The guy
Yeah.
always delivers. Was it one of his standout ones? Like I would recommend Mistborn and Emperor Soul and all that other stuff before this, but this is still a fun read for sure. It's not like I wouldn't recommend it. It's just one of those fun
I mean,
detours.
it's interesting because Sanderson has his list on his website, which is
Where to start?
basically like, where would you start with my books? And
Hmm.
it's his recommendation for like, if you like romance, check out Warbreaker. Like, that was always the one listed under that. To me, I would very quickly replace Warbreaker with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter if someone wanted to read a
Romance.
Sanderson romance.
Yeah.
However, if someone came to me wanting to read fantasy romance, I think it would take a lot of recommendations before I started throwing Sanderson's name out there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that I'm just saying it does in the Sanderson repertoire. I think it has its place. And I don't know, I think it's like it does have the most kind of like uh, art, like free flowing artistic kind of feel to it. I'll say Emperor's Soul feels like pretty like
I really
artistic, I
liked
guess,
Emperor
as well.
Soul.
Yeah, I can tell there, Charles. I mean, how do you think this compares to the like Warbreaker, for example? Like,
It's been so
is
long since I've read Warbreaker, but I feel like it had the similar thing of there's that mystery driving the story and kept you
yeah,
turning the page. And I remember, there was the clever character, and you're like, okay. But I remember really liking it. I don't remember a romance too much. But I do remember enjoying it enough to say that maybe I would slightly prefer that book over Yumi and the Nightmare
hmm,
Painter. But Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is just so much more niche to Sanderson's
yeah,
offerings that um, it kind of stands out on certain things. But no, I remember really liking Warbreaker, and I remember some of the characters and like I remember being more hooked on the mystery and kind of one more page at night trying to just get through it, and not wanting to put it down. And that was a fun experience for me that I remember about it. So I would kind of lean more towards Warbreaker. But for romance, to your point, this is his strongest showing for sure.
yeah. So on his website, he it literally says, if you like romance, try Warbreaker. That's the recommendation. So I would
That's a
at
good
least
phrasing.
replace,
Try
yeah.
it. Not you have to read. You
No,
should
but
definitely.
all of these are say the same. So he's pretty quick to recommend Mistborn as well. He said, if you consider yourself a fantasy reader, try Mistborn, The Final Empire,
Yeah.
or he
Oh,
says
yeah.
The Way of Kings, which I would much sooner. I mean, if you're a fantasy reader and you like epic fantasy, I would
If you're a
much be like,
fantasy
yeah,
reader
sure.
and you haven't read Mistborn or Way of Kings, then read it. It's just like one of those weird things where it's like, how do you wind up in a spot where you're like, I don't know what to read next? And I haven't read Mistborn or Way of Kings. I mean, I know they're
I
out
mean,
there.
it
It's just,
happens. I mean, people are all at different places in it. Like, it took me
sure,
longer
sure.
to start reading Sanderson than
I
I
was
think
way late
you
to the
might
party with Way of Kings.
expect. Like,
Way late to the party.
yeah.
So I can see that happening for
I
sure.
mean,
But
yeah,
I
I don't
picked up
know. I read
Mistborn
a lot of
relatively
fantasy books
quickly.
before. Yeah, and you were recommending it to me, and then I finally like got around to it. I think I kind of so Sanderson wasn't as big back then too. Like he was not considered
Right.
the like biggest name in fantasy at that time. He was
Right.
up among the bigger ones,
He
but
was. I mean, he had written Wheel of Time, like he had
yeah,
finished it. That was like the most recent thing that he did that was like a big deal. And so he had a lot of respect, but then like yeah, Mistborn was super popular and then Way of Kings just brought him into the next stratosphere. So and
yeah.
then
I
Way of
mean,
Kings was when exactly? It's been a while.
like you have to
2010.
think. So the first trilogy in Mistborn was published between 2006 and 2008. So you start going back to like, okay, when was, let's see, something like, when was The Lies of Locke Lamora published? 2006. So at that point, like Mistborn and Lies of Locke Lamora are coming out the
What a
same
time to be a
year. What
fantasy
a
reader,
time to
man.
be
What a
like a
time.
right. But so that was a
That
good
was when we
year.
were
But
coming up as readers, so it's a different
so
time.
yeah, it was a different time. There's lots of great books coming out now too, for sure.
Hmm.
But those are two of our favorites. And I'll say, like, that was a time where we didn't know that Scott Lynch would suddenly just be like not publishing novels for
Right.
how long now? Like, well over a decade, probably,
Yeah,
or
it's
at
coming
least
up on
over a
15
decade, I
years,
think,
it's
right?
like
Like,
10 plus years.
but since his most recent book. Anyway,
Hmm.
point being, it's been a long time. Then we've got something like when was Name of the Wind published? 2007. So it's like this was like a time where a
What
lot
a
of
time.
these guys, well, I guess I'll say guys because those three were, but lots of great fantasy written by folks of all genders. But folks like those are publishing
Blade
these
itself was also
big
2006, I'll
books.
say.
Blade, it's okay. That's a good call.
What a
So like all these
time.
are coming out, and they're all getting big, and we don't know the way things are going to go. Where Sanderson's going to publish a million novels and become like the face of contemporary fantasy, basically.
Right.
Like, or I'll say contemporary epic fantasy, because like probably
Hmm.
Sarah J. Maas at this point is probably the face of fantasy, whether we would choose her or not.
Hmm.
But point being, at that time, it was like Scott Lynch could have been moving in that
Yeah,
direction.
Prince of
Patrick
Thorns was
Rothfuss
until
seemed,
2011, and
yeah,
that's like a grim dark pillar, so it was
yeah.
before that.
And then like Rothfuss, Name of the Wind was probably significantly bigger than Mistborn. Um, the the thing is though, when you just stop publishing novels, then you don't really pick up the same steam as a guy who's publishing a million novels. So it very
Yeah.
easily could have been like Patrick Rothfuss is now the face of contemporary epic fantasy. Um,
And Memory
and
of Light didn't come out till, which is the last book in Wheel of Time, until 2013.
wow,
So,
that's wild.
yeah, it was a significant. Let me make sure I have that right, because that doesn't seem right to me. But why is it? That could be one of those things where Google's just freaking wrong. Let me pull it up.
You don't look at
No, it's
the
right.
AI thing, Charles.
Memory of Light, 2013. So not long ago at all. And so Sanderson only started publishing for Wheel of Time with The Gathering Storm, book 12 of 14, which came out in 2009. So this was pre-Mistborn. I mean, post-Mistborn. Mistborn was 2006, right? So
Yeah.
he was kind of writing them at the writing and
Yeah.
releasing these things around the same time. So yeah, could you imagine hiring Sanderson before like Mistborn came out? Like what a interesting lineup of things that happened around the same time. Because you imagine like when did he start
Yeah.
writing all these things versus when they got published? They're probably right on top of each other. So yeah, a lot of
Yeah. I mean,
interesting.
I think he got after Elantris
Yeah.
that that's when they brought him on to finish Wheel of Time, but
Yeah,
then
but he was just like,
shortly after,
let's pick this guy, right? He wrote a really good book, like up and coming guy, Brandon
yeah,
Sanderson. Because Sanderson was a huge fan of Wheel of Time and
yeah. And
very
it's not a
public about that.
coincidence. Wheel of Time played a huge role in how Sanderson became the
Oh yeah,
like
I always
heir
am
apparent to
comparing Stormlight Archive to Wheel of
Wheel of
Time
Time.
because you can tell that's how he sees it. He's like, this is my Wheel of Time, like
Yeah.
this is my epic story. So it's kind of interesting to see him do that for himself after he's culminated all of this fame and even written some of Wheel of Time himself. So it's just kind of
Yeah.
interesting to see um, how it's all kind of planned out. But yeah, it's been a long time with Sanderson. It's been a while.
And it's
15
great to
years.
see him still honing his skills in different ways, which brings us back to Yumi and the Nightmare Painter because
Oh yeah.
it's a
That's why we're here.
uh, it's yeah, that's why
You
it's
weren't here for a
well
history lesson?
no, but at least it kept Sanderson focused. I'm sure a lot of folks listening care enough about Sanderson as a whole if they're reading Yumi and the Nightmare Painter to be interested by
True.
that conversation. But I will say it's promising. You mentioned him going in different directions, and it's the kind of thing now where we're like, okay, Sanderson, like when you get to the next new romance that's developing in the Stormlight archive, like do this.
Yeah.
Like,
Remember
how
what
would you
you've
just
done
do
here.
this that time?
Yes.
And I think like he's uh, what's the word for he's honing his skills. I wanted a synonym for that phrase, but I couldn't think of one. Like he's uh, developing his chops for writing
Mhm.
romance and having a kind of more artistic pantsing approach to writing. And I think it's only going to serve him well as he continues to grow as an author and continues
Yeah.
to develop because it would be easy, as we've kind of been saying, for him to just be like, I can just keep making bamboo. I can just keep painting bamboo and you'll keep
Yep.
buying it and I'll
Yep.
keep making money and I'll support my family and I don't really have to challenge myself and it'll still be really good because I'm Brandon
Yeah.
Sanderson.
And look, Wind
Like,
of Truth is coming out December 6th of this
yes.
year. Would it surprise you to say that the word count is 40,000 words higher than Rhythm of War? Which is
I don't find that shocking because I just
which
that's
was
the direction these things move. They get bigger,
yeah.
not
So
smaller.
when you're planning this huge release, this is like Endgame coming out, right? Well, not really, but it's like one of those Avengers movies, a big one coming out because it's not the
Yeah.
last book, but huge release for him. Like the last one, Rhythm of War, came out in 2020, so we've got 4 years of buildup now.
And isn't this like the last book of his like first era kind of though? Like
10 books are
doesn't he
planned
have
into series,
right.
broken down into 2 sets of 5. So this is
Yes.
the first set that's ending
Yes.
with Wind and Truth. We got to clear our schedule in December. I know what my
Yeah,
holiday
we
read's
do
going to
gotta
be. I always
we
like
gotta be
one,
on top
I
of
get
it.
like that week off in December. They were just like jump into a book. I guess it's going to be Wind and Truth this year. So,
Yeah.
which will be exciting. And yeah, it's just a matter of will it be more bamboo? Or I mean, this word count's growing like bamboo, like 3 feet a freaking second, but
Does
it's
bamboo grow fast?
very fast. Yeah,
Oh,
that's the main
nicely done then.
characteristic of it. It's,
I thought the main
it's,
characteristic was that pandas eat it.
I mean, not fast enough.
Eh,
So, no, it grows super fast, and if your neighbor's planted or something, you're screwed because it just takes over. It's the world's fastest growing plant, shooting out of
wow.
the ground at an astonishing 4 centimeters per second. So it
What?
can grow about 35 inches in a single day.
What?
Yeah, dude, it's crazy.
I mean, that is like a Sanderson novel.
Exactly. It's like it's about 1,000 words a day, and it keeps growing. I can't stop it. So yeah, it's pretty
That's
wild.
wild.
Hmm.
How is it? How are there not like bamboo stalks shooting into space?
That is a great question
We've
that
done
we
it.
may
This,
never know.
the dumbest question of all time has been asked.
Yes, like why if bamboo grows at this rate, why aren't there like skyscraper sized bamboo stocks? Hey, when you make your own fantasy world, you just write a bamboo plant that just grew into space. It's just like it doesn't stop, bro. No one's cut it down. It just keeps going. Um,
I
it
guess
says
it's
it
the
takes 3 years to
pandas.
get established, and once established, the new shoots that emerge in spring will continue to get bigger. Okay, blah blah blah. So yeah, apparently it's like an
What's the
aggressive.
cap?
I think it's not like, oh, they grow that much every day, just 365
Yeah.
days a year. I think it just shoots up in a 60-day period and it just gets huge and then it spreads fast. So I don't know what the cap is, but it's showing by year 4 that it's taller than a human being, like in this picture here I'm looking at. It's pretty interesting.
That
But
by book 8 in Stormlight Archive, the book will probably be taller than a human being.
sure, sure. Probably. I mean, we're getting there. It's going to be almost 500,000 words. Like Rhythm of War was already huge. I can't imagine bookstores stocking this book. It's got to be freaking massive. It's
They'll
going to be
find a way for a
huge.
Sanderson book, don't you worry.
Oh
It'll
yeah.
I you know what? It's always funny seeing like the mass market paperbacks of these books that they're
I
like
can't even open
huge,
it.
but they're small with their like tiny font. Like they're huge, but they're very thick, but they're not very tall. Unlike the mighty bamboo plant, which is
Right.
thin and tall.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, man, the audiobook for Rhythm of War was 57 and a half hours long. This one's going to have to be 60, you know? It's got to be.
Yeah. How many words
Wow.
longer did you say? Then
40,000, so
oh
it's
my god, it's gonna be
it's like
into the
10%
60s.
longer, so it's going to be another
Yeah.
like 6 hours. Wow. Wow. So that's 63 hours long.
So if you listen
And
on normal speed, you will be listening to that book for, I mean, not quite, but like getting toward 3 full days,
that's
like if you
longer
didn't
than
sleep.
any Wheel of Time audiobook I'm looking here. And I remember those being long as hell. This is 41 hours I'm seeing is the longest one. Yeah, there's like 3 books that are 41 hours and change, and that's by far
Well,
the biggest. And so Brand, Brandon Sanderson has gone way past that. So, but hey,
hmm.
that's what he does. Keep doing his thing, keep pushing
Yeah.
forwards. We're rooting
Speaking to
for
that,
him.
Charles, yeah, let's maybe we should start moving this toward the end before we start creeping up toward 60 hours of recording time over
I can
here.
appreciate that. Dude, 60
Yeah.
hours, it would take us almost a year to record that much. A little less. It's like a year's worth of
Yeah.
content for us. If you do an hour an episode, I know we run a little long most times, but if you do like an hour an episode and an episode a week, that's over a year.
Hey, think it
So,
took Sanderson way over a year to write the book. So I would am I saying that we are more prolific than Brandon Sanderson?
hmm.
I'll leave that to
I
you,
mean,
the
we're putting out new
listener.
stuff every week. What, Sanderson's what? Yearly at best? Come on. 4 books. We
I
did
mean,
like
he
100
puts out
episodes in the pandemic. Like,
a
come on.
lot of books per year.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
he's
I
insane.
yeah, I think. Well, how about when we used to do 3 episodes a week? That was actually pretty intense
That was
back in the
insane,
day.
but it kickstarted the show for sure. But it was that was when you're just home all day with nothing to do. You kind of have the luxury to do those kinds of
Yeah,
things. And
because it was the pandemic, Charles.
yes, the
And
pandemic.
I'm just clarifying so people know we weren't just like, well, that was before we made any friends and had
Yeah, that was
relationships
just when
and
we decided
like
to
jobs.
isolate ourselves from
Yeah.
society for a
Yeah.
year, and no, yeah, that's when
That's
we
the
started.
pandemic. Yeah.
hmm And now here we are. World is open back up, jobs, lives,
Ugh,
and here we
lives.
it's how many years has it been? It's 4 now that we've done the show, and we're still here. We're still free. We're still talking fantasy. Still friends. It's a pretty good
Yeah.
run.
Yeah.
And not bad. And here we are, you
Not
guys
bad.
listening to this diatribe at the end here. You guys are the best part about the whole thing. So there we go.
Nice, Charles.
I think the only thing to do at this point is just to bring this home, man. We can't go any further.
This
Let's wrap
episode's
this up.
longer than a bamboo plant. 60 days into its maturation, am I right?
Oh my god, man! What is it? Spring in the bamboo country, or what? This thing is going on and on and on. Let's get this outro music going. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Now, Dylan, if the fans like what they heard today and they want to support the show, I think the best way that they could do that is over on the socials, right? That's at the FTF podcast on Instagram and on Twitter. Not Twitter, Instagram and TikTok. And then at the FTF podcast with number 1 on the end for Twitter. But if they happen to have listened to the show and have already done all those things, and they want to support the show even more, what could they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify, where most of you are listening. Just click about on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed. Click where the stars are. You know how many to give us. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That means you can say nice things about us. You can say, hey, Charles, I think you had really astute observations about the bamboo plant. I mean, the way you worked bamboo, while it was both in the story and to get at Sanderson's length of his novels, was impressive. But you don't have to do that. Oh, also rate. Also subscribe and follow. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Well said, Dylan. Just listening, more than enough. Thank you all for making it to the end and for giving us a go. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.